Today I was transcribing a Steve Lukather solo for the Session Heroes Patreon page, and while analysing it, it dawned on me that firstly, there was some non-diatonic chord changes happening, and secondly, that Steve was dealing with these beautifully. I decided that it might be beneficial for me to break down Luke's approach and break down my approach to breaking down Luke's approach, in the hope that it will help you with your improvisation, with playing through changes, and with writing solos in general. If you would like the notation and the tab for the solo, as well as the backing track that I've created, please check out the Session Heroes Patreon page. You'll notice that I don't have adverts turned on pretty much any of my videos if I can help it. So Patreon is how you guys can support me in making more videos like this one, and you get a bunch of transcriptions and lessons that no one else gets as well. Now, before we can work out what Luke is doing, we first have to work out the chord progression itself. In previous lessons, I've gone into a lot of depth about the foundations of Western harmony and Western music theory, so I'm only going to give a very brief overview of some of those basics now. If you would like this in more depth, go and check out my video, How I Wish I'd Been Taught Modes. It's really important that we have a very solid understanding of how major scale harmony works when it comes to analysing anything. It really is the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. For now, the crux of what you need to know is that the major scale is constructed using the following formula. Starting on whichever root note we choose, we have root, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That should be something that everyone has memorized. The second thing is that when we harmonize this scale with itself through a process called harmonizing in thirds, whereby we start at the first note and then we take every other note from the scale and then stack them on top of each other. This is how we generate diatonic chords. So that process is repeated from each degree of the scale in turn. And if we stack 3 notes on top of each other all the way through the scale, then we get triads. If we stack 4 notes on top of each other, we get 7th chords. If we stack 5 notes, we get 9th chords, 11th, 13th, etc. Now, we don't need to worry about 11th and 13th chords right now. All we need to know is that when we harmonize the major scale, it always gives us the following order of chord qualities: major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Okay, it's really important that we have a firm grasp of that when it comes to analysing what's happening within the progression a little later on. Now, my advice when it comes to transcribing chord progressions is start with the root notes. I use the analogy with my students that when we're looking at a piece of art, a painting, we have the ability not only to stand back and view the piece of work as a whole, but also to be able to focus our vision and zoom in on certain details, colours, scenes within scenes. Well, we need to be able to develop the same skill when it comes to music. So when you listen to a track, what you need to train your ears to do is to sort of sift through and filter through the different things going on in the track, so that you can kind of lock in on what the bass is doing, or lock in on what the keys are doing, or whatever it may be. So what we need to do to start off this process of transcription is to lock in on what the bass or the lowest thing in the track is doing. Generally speaking, although there are some exceptions, this will give us a good idea about what our root movement is, which gives us a start for analysis. So in the case of this track, we're starting with a B flat, we go down to G flat, E flat, F, G flat, and then back to F. Don't worry if it takes you a minute to figure this out. It's more important that you're correct than it is that you're fast. The speed comes with time and it comes with practice. So if you're not used to transcribing things by ear, just be patient with yourself. Repetition is really the key. Try and do it a little bit every week, every day, however often you're able to work on it. Okay, so you remember from earlier that when we are constructing harmony, we build in thirds. So after the root note, we have a third, and then we have a fifth, and then a seventh, etc. So the next interval in our stack is the third. So the next phase of our transcription process is going to be trying to figure out whether each of these chords has a major or a minor third. There are only two options initially, and we can do this literally through auditioning them by playing along with the track, auditioning each chord as being either major or minor, and it will become pretty quickly apparent which one it is, because there'll be a horrible clash if you pick the wrong one. Okay, so I would listen to the track and I would go, okay, well, I know B flat is my root, so let's try a major third. And if you try playing that along with the track, it don't fit at all. So by process of elimination, we know that B flat minor is where we're starting. So if I were to go through the whole of the chord progression like this, with just roots and thirds, I'd figure out that we have B flat minor, G flat major, E flat minor, F minor, G flat major, and then F major. Now what you do is repeat this process with each interval in turn. So once you've got the root and the third, you're going to need to figure out what the fifth is doing, and then what the seventh is doing, and so on and so forth. Now it's not always completely necessary that we go to this amount of detail. Sometimes if you're dealing with a pop song, you know, they might only have 3-note chords in them, so this process becomes a lot easier. When you've got this kind of smart 80s pop music where we have chords borrowed from other keys, and we have extensions, we have all sorts of stuff going on, sometimes this can take a little bit longer to get the full picture in our heads of what is happening harmonically speaking. Okay, so if we skip ahead a little bit, the chords we've got for this progression now are B flat minor 7, G flat dominant 7, E flat minor 7, F minor 7, G flat major 7, and then we have an altered chord, an altered dominant chord, which is F7 flat 9. Okay, so now we have a map. We know, loosely speaking, what the chords are doing. This is really good. But if we want to get the most out of this, we have to analyze it. We have to figure out where these chords are coming from. Now, a good way to approach this is to cast our minds back to that diatonic sequence from earlier. Do you remember? When we harmonize the major scale, we always get the sequence major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. And each of those chords are separated by the same intervals as the major scale, which was our first bit of knowledge. Root, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So if we combine those two things, we can generate the 7 diatonic chords within any major key. Now, when it comes to analysis, one thing that is very helpful is that that sequence has some very obvious clues within it. So, for example, we only have one place within the diatonic sequence where we have 2 minor chords next to each other, adjacent to each other, separated by a tone. So let's say, for instance, in the key of C major, just as an example, if that is our tonic, the second and the third chord are both minor and they're both separated by a tone. That is the only place within the key where that particular relationship exists. Along those same lines, once again, within the key of C major, the 4 and the 5 chord, in this case, are both major and they're both separated by a tone. Again, that is the only place within the key where that particular relationship exists. Why is this important? Well, it helps us to reverse engineer chord progressions. So if we cast our mind back to our progression for this track, do we have any of those clues present? Well, yeah, we do, because we've got E flat minor 7 and we've got F minor 7. So if we think about the chords within a major key, and we know that that is 2 and that is 3, we work backwards from there, it means our 1 chord very well could be D flat major. Now, if we test that theory, it would mean that our chord progression could be analysed as follows. We have the 6 minor, We have an anomaly with the G flat dominant 7th chord because that doesn't fit in the key. But then we have the 2 minor, the 3 minor, the 4 major, and then another anomaly. There's some debate about, different ways that you can analyze something that's non-diatonic, but generally speaking, very much feels like we're in the key of D flat major and our tonal center is the B flat, which means we're in B flat Aeolian. And then we have a couple of borrowed chords. More specifically, what we have are a couple of what we call secondary dominants. Now, bear with me. Within a major key, there is only one place that a dominant 7th chord occurs naturally, and that is on the 5th degree. So in the key of D flat, we would expect to see the dominant 7th chord occurring on the A flat, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, but we have a dominant 7th chord here, and also here. And this is where the idea of secondary dominants come in. A secondary dominant is simply a dominant chord which exists on a degree other than the 5th of your parent or umbrella key. Now, all of that probably seems like a lot of work. I know, believe me. But something I realized a long time ago is that it's not by accident that players like Steve Lukather or Michael Landau or Dan Huff sound as good as they do all the time. I know that they would probably all say that they all make mistakes, but generally speaking, they never really land on a duff note. They always seem to have complete control over what they're doing. And for ages, I was absolutely amazed by this. And then I realized it's because they have an awareness of what they're doing at all times. They know the changes they're playing over, and more importantly, they know exactly how to outline those changes within their melodic playing. And I'm going to prove it, okay? So let's break down the first couple of phrases of this solo. So our opening phrase is something like this. Now remember, at this point in the track, we're playing over a B flat minor 7 chord. And whenever you're analysing something, you're always analysing it in relation to whatever chord is happening at the time. It's not even thinking about the parent key. You're analysing it in relation to what is happening in that moment, because in that moment, that is what your ear is recognising as being the context. So if we break down the notes in a B flat minor 7 chord, we have B flat, D flat, F, and A flat. And if we look at the notes within this opening phrase, we have F, so we have the perfect 5th, we have the minor 3rd, we have the 2nd, and we have the root. So we've got 3 chord tones in there. We've got the root, the minor 3rd, and the perfect 5th. To me, that is spelling out the chord. And Luke continues to reinforce this with the next phrase, where again we're leaning heavily on that perfect 5th. Now, this is where things get interesting. So if you remember, our G flat dominant 7th chord is borrowed. This does not belong in this key, and this means we have a rogue note within the chord, so to speak. So within a G flat dominant 7th chord, we have G flat, B flat, D flat, and F flat, I know, which is to all intents and purposes E, but just from a theory point of view, we should call it F flat in this case, but it's this note. And if we were to look at our parent scale from earlier, remember we're in the key of D flat major overall. We don't have an E within that scale. We have D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, and C. So can you guess which note that Luke hits in the next part of the solo? Yeah, he hits E. He hits the one note within that chord that doesn't exist within the parent scale. So what he's really doing is drawing our attention to the fact that there is a chord within the progression that has been borrowed. Now, he could totally kind of, keep just working around mostly kind of B flat minor pentatonic stuff, and it would generally work fine, but because he has an awareness of what he's playing over, he makes the creative choice to actually make a bigger feature of this chord change. In the next phrase, Luke goes a little bit outside, so he's bringing in some notes from outside the scale, and he's also leaning on intervals that are not necessarily within the chord being played at the time. This seems to be a deliberate creation of tension to then release it in the next phrase. So we have this kind of idea, which is kind of leaning on intervals like fourths and seconds, and it's also bringing some notes in that don't belong in the scale. So it kind of creates a bit of tension, a bit of jazziness. I can feel the jazzers wincing as I say that. But then he quickly resolves going to the next chord. So as we move to F minor 7, all of that is literally chord tones. We have the 5th, minor 3rd, root, and the flat 7, so he's spelling out an F minor 7 chord. Now our penultimate phrase, which is being played over that G flat major 7 chord, is again leaning heavily on notes from within the chord. And this approach follows right through to the end of the solo, where again we are ending on a nice strong interval, kind of highlighting the perfect fifth of that last chord, which is that altered F7 chord. So this kind of proves the point that whether by intuition, whether by using his ears or his knowledge of music theory, Luke knows exactly what he's doing. He has an awareness of the harmony, he has an awareness of how the harmony is functioning, and he knows exactly which chord tones to lean on to lead the listener through that chord progression. Okay, let's see if we can get through this using chord tone soloing. Here we go. So how can we apply this to our own playing? Well, the long and the short of it is that you want to start learning to visualize the chord progression in real time as you are improvising. In other words, imagine yourself playing through the chords. Imagine this as little red illuminated dots on your fretboard, and this is going to provide you with a map for all of the sweet tones or consonant intervals or simply chord tones that will allow you to lead your listener through the chord progression. So we can see why it's so important that we do this analysis step first, because you can't really do this unless you have the chord progression that you're playing over pretty well internalized, that you can imagine yourself playing it in a few different positions. Now, there is a particular system that is really, really useful for this called the cage system. This is something I'm going to do probably a series of lessons on. It's been covered by lots and lots of other tutors and in many books, but I want to take you guys through the way that I would structure your learning with this particular concept, and this will really, really help you with this kind of thing. But for now, take the shapes that you know, try and visualize them in a few different places, and try and pass through some of those chord tones while you're improvising, particularly when you have chords that are from outside of the key and you want to highlight the note that is non-diatonic. So to review, step one, make sure we have a good fundamental understanding of how diatonic harmony works, how to construct the major scale, and which chords are derived from harmonizing that scale with itself. Number two, when you are figuring out a chord progression by ear, start with the root notes. This will make the whole process a lot less intimidating, and if you spend the time to get it right, it will make sure that your analysis is spot on later on. Thirdly, once you've got your root notes, move up to the next interval in your stack of thirds. So start to audition major and minor thirds for each chords, and your ear should tell you which ones are right or wrong. Step four, repeat this process, keep moving up through your stack, fifths, sevenths, etc., etc., if you want to get a detailed picture of what's happening within the harmony. Step five, analyze your progression. So remember to look for those clues that we have within diatonic harmony, like 2 minor chords a tone apart, 2 major chords a tone apart on the 2nd and 3rd or 4th and 5th degrees respectively, and use that as a way to reverse engineer what's happening within the progression. And finally, try to visualize these changes happening in real time as you're improvising, and try to move through the chord tones at specific points so that you're able to lead your listener through the changes. Remember, if you want the step-by-step breakdown for this solo, as well as the tab and the standard notation and the backing track, head over to the Patreon page. We will do more on this concept in the future. It's a little bit deep, so I didn't want to do it all in one lesson, but I hope that you found this a little bit useful, and maybe that it's given you a couple of ideas about how to approach your improvisation. Okay gang, have a great week, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.